Hey, you accursed! Before we start the show today, I have some goddamned exciting news. We four, your ever-loving political panel, are doing Curse of Politics live at Maple Leaf Gardens on November 17th, holding the show right there at Center Ice. I think it's called the Mattamy Center now, and there's a big grocery store in the building too, but that's not the point. The same storied venue that once hosted historic performances by Elvis, the Beatles, Muhammad Ali, and Elton John now gets Herle, Reid, Teneycke, and Leichnitz. This is a Rubicon strategy event with lots of pre- and post-networking opportunities and cocktails, bringing together Canada's top business leaders and political insiders for a live Curse taping. Again, that's Curse of Politics, live at Maple Leaf Gardens on November 17th. Reach out to Rubicon if you're interested in a high-visibility brand sponsorship, and I can't wait to see you all there. All right, you happily miserable accursed. It's Herle here with Teneycke, Reid, and Leichnitz. The three of us, and about 40 million other Canadians, are still gutted, still stricken, still bereft after Saturday's Game 7 Blue Jays loss. Now, Scott, I wanted to tell you something, because I know that you're not that big into accountability. You've got a big heart and you like to let people off the hook for things, but I'm not like that. I'm a fucking hard ass.
Yeah.
And I was saying to Kory earlier, I was saying, when your job is the closer, when they call you the closer,
right,
and it is the bottom of the ninth, top of the ninth, sorry, in the Game 7 of the World Series, and you're facing the number 9 batter in the order, you can't give up a home run.
I think that's true. I think that everyone on Earth agrees with that. I think Dodgers agree with that. I think Blue Jays fans agree with that. Yeah.
Closer.
And the only thing, I mean, and it just makes you feel human kindness and regret for the guy. He sat in the dressing room after the game and said, "I've cost every man in this room a World Series ring." Like, I don't know, man. They would find me stuck to the front of a subway train. I don't think that I could handle it.
I don't know. Maybe he should distribute some of the $10 or $15 million he's being paid this year to do that job. Was this a crushing event in the Leichnitz household?
I mean, I did watch from the bottom of the ninth onward, so even my
what a fan! Now,
cynical
that is the tail end of the bandwagon.
That's
like
right.
that is,
yeah, I was like, fine,
that is bumper
fine.
tagging on the bandwagon.
That's right. That's like for showing up at the Santa Claus Day parade
That's
when
me,
the reindeer
right
arrive.
110%. But with my whole about 25 minutes of investment, yeah, I was also heartbroken. So, but I do have to say, I thought the attitude afterwards and and he was really contrite and they actually seemed to like each other, and the energy that it brought, I think, in terms of the experience for people around Toronto. And anyway, it's the friends we made along the way, you guys.
I hate all that. I hear that all over the place in Toronto. People are like, but they really brought the city together. No. I hate all that.
Scott is not here for a good time.
I'll tell you what. If you want to say that, you come say it to my 12-year-old. Because when you were 12 years old and you stay up to after midnight to watch your team win the World Series and they blow it, you do not have hey, but buddy, we really gave it a great run and no one expected us to be here. His answer to that was, fuck you, Dad.
Well, it's welcome to the heartbreak of team sports and politics. So.
Right. And if it was any kind of metaphor for what we're all going through, Canada was plucky, it fought hard, it perhaps outplayed the other team, but the bigger place with more money fucking ultimately won.
Yeah, that feels true.
I mean, this has been my overwhelming experience in political life as well. So,
although I will say this, it was better than getting up at 3 a.m. when I was in Europe to watch Game 7 and watch the Oilers lose because I was less sleep deprived. But yeah, bad news in both cases. It just feels like another one slipped through our fingers.
Yeah. All right. So here's what we're going to talk about. By the way, Scott, you should care more about this than you do again also. But this is the 50th anniversary of the week that Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy was released. So that's behind me on my thing. So here's the lineup today. Prime Minister Carney's long-awaited budget comes down tomorrow. He and Minister Champagne have teased it as generational. What's it all about? Is it going to pass? And if not, what's the political fallout? We'll break all that down. And that's a big topic, and so is the subject of our cursed clipping today. It comes from Justin Ling writing in the Toronto Star about Trump, trade, Carney's apology to Trump, and all the travails of negotiating a trade deal with the U.S. and why not negotiating a trade deal with the U.S. right now is the best result, according to Mr. Ling. After which the ethereal Mr. Pinsent closes us out with his hey yous. All right, you information-craving hurly-burlyites. Who wants to learn more about AI nodes and stacks? Rhetorical question. It's my pod and I make the rules. Thus, I give you more AI demystification from our presenting sponsor, TELUS, who are rightly proud of their new sovereign AI factory in Rimouski, Quebec. So, nodes. Love that sentence. 2 little words, but an infinite amount of computational power. Because an AI node is akin to a brain neuron. It works to process data, and when one node is linked to other nodes, they collectively solve the most complex problems. But while a human brain's approximately 86 billion neurons are limited by physical constraints, AI nodes can scale infinitely and process data at superhuman speeds. TELUS is using the most advanced GPUs from NVIDIA for their nodes, capable of performing trillions of calculations per second. I don't mind telling you that my personal set of 86 billion neurons, if it's still that, can hardly comprehend that. Moving on to the accurately named AI stack and what makes TELUS's so special. Accurate because it's basically layer upon layer of tech. Data center, computer hardware, storage, security, networking, orchestration, platform, applications, all of these complex functions coming together in a manageable system to enable efficient and scalable AI implementation. But remember, it's not just an AI factory, it's a sovereign AI factory by design, which is true for every layer of the stack. So all components of the factory, all those layers I just talked about, are under Canadian control, empowering businesses to be AI creators here at home without foreign dependence. Next week, more AI demystification and a deeper dive into TELUS's unique relationship with NVIDIA. So, team, let's get going here. Scott, you're the liberal, you're the insider. You must know what's in the budget this week.
Oh, listen, I'm glad you asked because I am aware. I have no idea. We'll see. I mean, I think it's going to spend less and invest more. It's going to, but to me that, I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see. My guess is they're going to have big pots of money for housing, big pots of money for certain investments, and then you're going to see a bunch of cuts in federal public service, a bunch of grants and contributions, a bunch of third parties are going to be anxious and worried about where they're at because they're going to have to chop that stuff. But set that aside. Here's what I really think about this. And I don't say this happily, but I think the pre-budget period has failed. I think that the pre-budget sale of this budget has failed. And I say that for a bunch of reasons. I don't think they have properly framed this budget, in my opinion. And that means there is going to be a massive weight on their shoulders in terms of post-budget sale, assuming that the budget passes and we're not into an election. And to me, I've thought a lot about this. And yes, they're going to try to pull off this messaging of, look, we're doing a massive generational transfer. We're going to cut back the operations of government, all the stuff that drives you crazy, all the contracts, all the swelling and swollen nature of the federal bureaucracy. We're going to cut back all that, grants and contributions, all these payouts, and we're going to redirect those funds to the things that matter most, that are going to give us 1950 style investments in like roads and highways and infrastructure and energy infrastructure and so on and so forth. So we'll see if they can pull that off. But they have provided a situation where I think, other than on the most abstract level, they really are going to be almost starting on the day of the budget. And to me, the missing element is Tamidi. Tamidi is Trump made me do it. Trump made me do it. How come you're going to?
TMMDI, that is an acronym that you've invented.
That is my.
It sounds like a
branding here,
drink.
David.
I think there should be an umbrella in it.
We are breaking ground on the branding federal budget front. TMMDI. Trump made me do it, because think about it. I don't like all these cutbacks. I don't like all this belt tightening of the federal public service. I'm worried about the impact on this group, that group. I'm worried about, the federal public service. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, man. Trump made me do it. Like, if we don't cut back our spending in some of these areas, we are in deep trouble. And yes, some of these problems are around. Yes, the shed was full of dynamite, but Trump lit the match. Oh, I don't like us spending these massive amounts of money on energy infrastructure. I've got misgivings about the trade-offs in terms of climate and environmental considerations, so on and so forth. I think you're spending too much on it. I don't like where the deficit's at. It's too big. The numbers jaw-dropping. Sorry, man. Trump made me do it. They have not been setting up the Trump made me do it construct to fuel both these choices. They have contradictory pillars in their budget. We're going to spend less and we're going to invest more. They are contradictory. And so the thing that unites them and the thing that gives them a pass in terms of public opinion is, look, let's not bullshit ourselves. Trump is forcing us to make these decisions. We have to cut back in these places because Trump exists, and we have to marshal ourselves, and we have to spend like we would normally never spend, because Trump has put us in a position where if we can't count on access to the US market, we're going to have to spend in order to provide economic growth and job security for ourselves. Trump made me do it. And that has not been the driving narrative up to this budget. And I think they need it to excuse both of the sins, because half of public opinion is going to hate each half of this budget. Half of Canadians will hate the cuts. Half of Canadians will hate the investments. And a lot of people might think, oh, okay, I get the transfer, but they haven't sold it. And the thing that sells it is Trump. Trump is your giant enabler in terms of the choices you're making. And I don't know why they haven't sold it more acutely and more explicitly that way, and sold the logic of it. And they're going to have to do it on budget day and in the days after the budget.
Just to stick with you for a second, Scott, don't you think, and this bleeds into the whole conversation we're going to have all day, that the problem is that Trump is listening?
Well, yes. And I mean, listen, if we run an ad,
So not to leapfrog, but if you,
I know I'm not going back to it necessarily at this second, but I'm just saying, like, look, if we run an ad in Texas saying we have to spend on Build Canada homes because Trump is fucking us, I guess maybe it'll bug him. I don't know that we can't say, and frankly, I think we have to say, and in some ways it's clarified now because the talks aren't on anyhow. Look, we're having to make these choices because Donald Trump is forcing us to deal with an acute problem and perhaps some underlying problems. I just think you have to say that. And I don't think I think that can be managed as a risk, but I definitely think it's necessary. And I think it's been absent. Maybe it's been absent because they've been worried about this balance, but it's been too abstract, too high level, too immersed in the illusion that this is a management consultant lecture that people are following carefully and parsing each paragraph and sentence, and that they get the trade-off of spend less, invest more. I don't think the idea makes sense on the face of it. I don't think it's been sold. And more importantly, the motivation behind it, which is always a critical piece of political communication, has not been explicitly repeated and reinforced.
All right. Kory, how do you think they're set up going into the budget?
Well, not terribly well. I'm surprised how big a question mark what's going to be in the budget is, like in terms of specifics. Like normally these pre-budget rollouts, you've got one or two things held in reserve that come out on the day of, but
we invented this.
Yes, I know you.
We invented this.
Yeah.
Scott, take your victory lap.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to spike the football here on the 30-yard line. I win. Rock on. I'm Hoffman.
Well, I think in the Canadian context, yeah, you guys are the pioneers of releasing the whole budget.
Now I took some credit, so he has to take it away. He's got
to pioneers. But now we're out there chopping ice to get some fresh water.
Every other government seems to have endorsed it by doing same. Like I think it's orthodoxy and has been for as long as that's been, way back near the advent of fire and the chiseling of the first stone wheel. when you guys started doing this, uh, but but where is the pre-budget rollout? Like, I think there's a lot of question marks as to what's going to be in this thing. I think there's some hints. There's the contradictory messaging that you've been talking about, Scott. I largely agree that that's the correct way to try to have some sort of resolution of that conflict in the messaging, which is, and I think it has the benefit of being true that this stuff is Trump related, although it's also, and in fairness, related to chronic overspending by the Trudeau government that has limited our fiscal room to maneuver here through program spending. Like, in the fullness of time, was the right decision to add new entitlement programs around childcare and pharmaceuticals, et cetera. Was that affordable in the context of our current fiscal situation? I think there's a good argument to be made it wasn't. So, look, I'm even more surprised at the lack of willing partner being found in the opposition, and the lack of interest seemingly in the government to try to find one. Like, I think if we're going to talk orthodoxy in minority budgets is a lot of time trying to find something for at least one of the opposition parties to get behind in a that's sizable enough that'll have them hold their nose on the rest of the budget and move forward. I don't see that yet. The most natural dance partner, I think, still for the government in many respects is the NDP. I think the NDP are still, have trauma from supporting the Trudeau government in the way they did. And I think a larger sense that served them poorly in the end. So it's maybe not such a big surprise that they're not that willing to go there. But I haven't seen any real effort to woo them on the part of the government. I think
could they really though, Kory? Could they and keep their brand? Like, if I was working in there, I would be saying, okay, if we want to be seen as different from Trudeau, and if we want to be seen as more focused and responsible economically on Trudeau, then we can't have a budget deal with the NDP. We can't.
I agree with that.
Okay, well, you need a budget deal with somebody, and the obvious dance partner is never going to be the official opposition. Like, they should be the least likely to support you in most cases. Like, I think,
although they were in 95, reform was one of the best things the Liberals had going for them was reform. We're cheerleading them along the way.
I don't think
we're not in that situation.
We're not in that situation, but also I think the Bloc was still the official opposition by one seat. Actually, I think Stephen Harper might have been to blame in that. No, I'm trying to go back in time. Like, it got very close there, and then I think Harper left to run the National Citizens Coalition.
Okay.
But look, it's not that time, irrespective, right? And the situation on the deficit isn't the same as it was, as we've talked about before. Basically, everyone in the country was clamoring about the deficit and about the debt and the need to deal with that, and questions about the solvency of the country if we didn't get behind that. We're just not in that situation at current, and we're dealing with a bunch of other issues. The Bloc, I don't know. The Bloc, we need to bring a Quebecer on our little panel here, because I'm not close enough to it to give you a read as to where they're at. But I can read a news story, and the Bloc are clearly not positioning to support the budget. So you've got Elizabeth May, I assume, but you're still short a couple of votes. I don't
know. You got Elizabeth May.
Maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. I've always thought she was an unofficial, like an ex officio member of the party, but for you guys, but
I don't think so.
I don't know. But who's going to vote for it? So now this is just some sort of faith-based effort where the assumption is some people are going to stay away. Well, that sounds more like a theory than something that you've actually got an agreement with another party on. It's a hell of a roll of the dice that these guys are doing, and I'm surprised that we're a few days out from a budget that we have very little idea as to what's going to be in it, and we don't have any clarity on who's actually going to vote for this thing in order to have it pass. It's I think it's a moment of great peril for the continuance of the government at the moment.
Trains look pretty much the same as they have for 100 years. Brutally powerful machines hauling a mile or more rail cars behind them, plowing through whatever the elements throw at them. But the railroaders at our sponsor CN know just how much more is going on that we cannot see. Like so many other moving things, trains are now effectively computers, carrying artificial intelligence. CN has spent a fortune on technology in recent years, and a lot of it is deployed to keep the trains and the communities they pass through safe. Sensors in tracks inspect train wheels as they pass overhead. Sensors on special train cars themselves inspect the tracks and the ground beneath and alongside them. Railroad ties, ballast, spikes, and plates are under constant scrutiny across the network. LiDAR systems use pulses of laser to create 3D corridor mapping. Special portals examine wheels and brakes as trains pass through. High-speed cameras are deployed along the network, generating real-time data feeds. AI algorithms are used to detect defects in wheels, axles, and brake rigging. CN collects 24 million data points per day from nearly 3,000 detectors that constantly monitor the health of its trains, supporting predictive maintenance. And all of this is done at full speed. It's been going on for years, and CN has conclusively demonstrated that advanced autonomous inspection technologies outperform traditional manual methods done by human beings. The tech has detected a significant number of defects that may otherwise have gone unnoticed. The railway is much safer than it was even a decade ago. But as is often the case, regulations have not kept up. Innovation will continue to transform the railway. CN wants to leverage and expand autonomous inspection technology. As it does, new opportunities will emerge for its railroaders, for them to have an even greater impact in moving Canada's economy. It will be good for the railway, for Transport Canada's inspectors, and for the communities along its vast network of tracks. Years of data speaks for itself. It's time for the government to let the railways move ahead. Jordan?
Well, I agree with a lot of the things that have been said, and I do love it when Kory rails against entitlement programs in the morning. It's better than a cup of coffee on my end. But look, I think that I'm going to add another dimension of criticism, I think, to build on what folks have already said, because I agree
Really?
with,
Fuck, this is a negative group of people.
another one,
Christ
because
almighty.
look,
You know
like
what I would do? I do everything different.
the contradiction for this government is at the heart of their strategy on the budget. It's the confusion of the message, right? So they have framed, such as they have done, which I agree was not done well, not done consistently, not done early, but such as they framed up the budget, the first thing they led with, the thing that they've returned to again and again is that idea of cuts, of sacrifice, of austerity. And I agree very much with Kory that it's not been we don't have kind of societal consensus on the why of that, right? Is it because of the deficits? Is it because of Trump? What is happening? And they've not been able to tell that story compellingly. But the problem with the frame in that budget, there's a second problem, which leads to their vote problem, which is that the way that they framed the budget is entirely aimed at the party who is least likely to support them in the budget vote. The framing of the budget has been very, very angled towards conservatives and conservative liberal voters, right? It's about fiscal responsibility. It's about growing investments in business and all of these things. And what they did by choosing that framing, by using words like austerity early on, by going back to that question of sacrifice, by being cagey about the depth of cuts that are happening, and by not really previewing anything significant about what the investment portion is going to be in any kind of a framing that would be attractive to progressives, is that they've made it really politically extremely difficult for the NDP to vote for this. And I would agree, David, I think that the bar already, even if this budget was full of all kinds of goodies ripped right from the NDP's platform, the bar would have already been very high because of the party's past experience with supporting the Liberals. They are needing also to demonstrate a break from that past practice. So already the test was going to be a lot. But now when you've loaded up the budget with a framing that tilts it like pretty far to the right, you've made it even more unappealing for the NDP to do anything really to pass it. And then to build a little bit on another thing that Kory was talking about, which is the process by which you would normally seek support in a minority government. This is usually something where you would see the governing party make efforts to build good and regular communication channels with opposition parties over the course of the weeks and months leading up to such a vote. That has not been done. They do not have a good sense of what is happening in these other caucuses. They do not have good relationships with those other parties beyond even leadership or House leader level. And now that leads them to a situation where I would argue they have poor intelligence, and they have very little sense of what's actually going on in those parties, which is a dangerous moment for them. Because I would agree right now, I think it's authentic that they don't have the votes going into this. I really think it is. And it's not because that would have been impossible had they played their cards differently over the last few weeks leading up to this budget, but because of the combination of how they framed this up and the fact that they elected to treat the opposition as though they were in a majority, even though they're in a minority, has set the table for a moment where accidents absolutely could happen in this.
So Scott, like that all makes sense. I agree, Jordan. And just let me stay with you for let me just stay with you for a second. Actually, I mistakenly almost went to Scott, but I do have something to ask you about, which is, so I still think the NDP are the most likely people to save the budget, probably by staying away. And Don Davies kind of foreshadowed that on the weekend that might happen. But, I am hearing people speculate about massive cuts to public service employees. Because if you look at the trajectory that would have to happen to balance the operating budget over 3 years, and the things that are excluded from that, like transfers, etc., right? You are left with people. And so
the choices are few.
Totally.
Right?
And these
so
are choices.
If there are tens of thousands of job losses in this budget, can the NDP actually stay away?
Well, I would say a couple things. I think first, like, we do need to also acknowledge that a lot of the fiscal choices the government is making in this budget are of their own making. So, we saw a story out today that the government has taken in $3 billion in counter tariffs. They had budgeted for $20 billion because they have dropped those counter tariffs. So they've done a lot on the revenue side to tie their own hands. And when you couple that with the boost in defense spending, which is, by the way, also going to shield defense and border security, also they're going to be shielded from job cuts. That means deeper cuts in other areas. And those, like, that didn't come out of nowhere. They made those choices, right? But here's the thing. In the budget, while you are going to certainly see dollar cuts, it's not necessarily going to be very specific in terms of what the impact of those cuts are on FTEs, on programs. Like, that will come later. So I do think it is a pressure point for the NDP for sure. And Don Davies has been out talking about how the party opposes massive public service cuts, but it's not necessarily going to be one-to-one evident on budget day what the impact of those cuts are. Sadly, we are all going to find out about that over the course of time. But I think that the problem for the NDP is that, well, they could stay away, sure. What is really their incentive to be the ones to take that burden on right now? They have a lot of pressure on the other side when the budget has been framed up this way, with cuts to services that people rely on, with, all of the programs and things that they have been really supportive of being clearly sidelined by this government. There's really nothing in there for them. So the government needs to find a way, and maybe it will be the housing investment. There is definitely things for them to play with there, but they've not done the work in setting the table in the framing of the budget that way to make it remotely sensical for the NDP to support it politically. So that work is now about 10 times as hard because it's going to have to happen post facto after the budget is tabled.
Right. Okay. So I just want to say, Scott, like, what if the Prime Minister is thinking that this... So, last week, the Bank of Canada lowered the interest rate. and then said they'd like to keep it there. They also said that they see growth in the Canadian economy between 0 and 1% as far as the eye can see, which is to say nothing, right? And that's based on assumptions like CUSMA remains in place, etc., right? So what if Carney just decided, I need the version of the 95 budget or the emergency budget, whatever it is. Like, we need a fucking course correction. There have been other important budgets besides 95. It's just the one I know. So let me talk about it. There was no politics in that, Scott, as you recall. I recall two political decisions regarding the content of that budget. One was our insistence on the tax on banks, and the other was Chrétien's refusal of the seniors benefit. Other than that, there was not a political consideration in terms of, it was just, here's what has to happen. Yep. Right? And we're going to sell this because we have to do this. Is it not possible he's in that spot?
Well, I think he could have done more to put himself in that spot, which is my critique of selling the budget. I want to make a distinction between selling the budget, framing the budget, and preparing people for this budget that, as you say, is going to be a landmark course correction budget, or at least it could be, should be. I want to make a distinction between that process, which I've been critical of, and the math and management of the vote. Because I don't think I agree with Jordan and Kory on that. I'm not as concerned about that. And I know you sort of go like, well, how could you not be concerned about it? The government could fall. I'm not concerned for two reasons. One, I think it would be a mistake for the government to have a party support it. Like, if the Bloc support it, it's awkward. If the NDP support it, it is echoes of Trudeau. And that distinction is so vitally important to the identity of this Carney government as being distinct from the Trudeau government. And I think, given how tight the vote is, how close to majority this government is, that you're better off finding the math through individuals, not through a full party deal. I think that's a better political outcome for you. The second thing is your point, which is you can also, while sincerely and emphatically signaling that you have no desire to go into an election, you can take that risk. Because these may well be the best conditions under which you fight an election, particularly if it appears as though there's been a startling, shocking, I didn't see it coming election that's been imposed by the opposition. And you could use that to try to help jet fuel your way into, why are we having this election? Ask Mr. Poilievre, it's his fault. And I think the Conservatives look like they're enthusiastic for this election. So I think their management, I still think Don Davies is going to stand up and say, listen, I can't control even the 6 people who sit with me in the NDP caucus. A couple of them may well show up to vote against it. But a few of us are going to say that we can't find enough in here to support the budget. But there are things in here that we feel strongly enough, coupled with Canadians' desire to not have an election, that we cannot vote against it. Therefore, we're going to bail. That will give them the magic number math, and that will happen. That's my prediction as to how this will occur. But I come back to it. I think that, the point you're making, David, the comparison to 95, maybe the comparison to 2009, although that got screwed up with this public subsidy issue and all that sort of stuff. But these kind of landmark course correction budgets, if that's what this is, I go back to how I really think they should have been selling. We have got to do things, because Trump and the revelation of Trump's belligerence about our underlying challenges economically force us to do things we wouldn't have otherwise thought. And that the political power, the political permission that Trump gives you with the Canadian public, I think is impossible to underestimate. And I think they have failed to harness it effectively. And I know I'm repeating myself. Last thing I want to say, though, is this: the Bloc fascinate me. I think the Bloc, and Kory sort of touched on this for a second, but they have angled themselves to be emphatically, impossibly against this budget. Now, maybe a couple of their members will still go missing, but I don't understand, and I think maybe Blanchette is more clever than I think. Maybe he thinks it's in his interest. Maybe he's making that game of chicken evaluation. He says, listen, if there's an election, I actually think that Carney's lack of French, I don't think that Carney can repeat the phenomenon that he did just a few months ago in Quebec. And I like my chances. And so I think that we can, and if it looks like it's an austere budget, or it can be presented as an austere budget, I think I can sell that a little bit better than what I had to sell in the last election a few months ago. So you know what? If this guy takes us into election, I don't think I am going to be Fabian Roy. I think I'm okay. And fuck it. We're going to make the guy sing for his supper.
It's a little like Christmas time in the Herle household, and for all you plugged-in politicos. Budget week is here. Among other things, it means the long-awaited unboxing of the Fed's climate competitiveness strategy. We've talked about it here before. Climate policy and competitiveness are mutually reinforcing. Our sponsor, the Canadian Climate Institute, agrees. So underline it, bold it, highlight it in bright yellow marker in your mind's eye. We are in a pivotal moment for Canada's economic future, and good climate policy is critical to the country's success. The climate competitiveness strategy, whatever it contains, should reflect that fact. On the cost side of the ledger, we've just come through our second worst wildfire season on record. The destruction of almost 9 million hectares across the country, fueled by climate change. On the opportunity side, in the face of the Trump trade, mania out there, Prime Minister Carney has just set the goal of doubling our non-U.S. exports in the next decade. And decarbonization is fast becoming the key driver of economic progress for our global trading partners. The UK, the EU, China, these critical markets are all massively investing in clean energy. They're reporting huge increases in renewables and electric vehicle adoption. China is expanding its already massive national carbon market to more sectors. And both the UK and EU are about to impose carbon tariffs on imports that don't already price carbon sufficiently. So, in a world where Canada's trading partners are doubling down on clean energy as economic growth, our own strong policies to drive climate competitiveness become ever more crucial. Strengthening our industrial carbon pricing systems, building bigger, cleaner electricity grids, cutting more methane emissions from the oil and gas sector, maintaining a strong EV mandate. These are all cost-effective actions that will attract investment for the economy of the future. I'll leave it there, but there's a lot more detail to be found about all of this at climateinstitute.ca. I've got some free advice for the Bloc and the NDP on this, which is, I believe that over the course of an election campaign, people may decide that they should have a different government. I don't rule that out at all. I'd be extremely surprised if people decided that they needed a weaker government.
I don't know. We'll see. Maybe.
That calculation, as we know, David, can play differently in Quebec. And they may decide that they need a nationalist bulwark.
I would be pretty anxious to have an election in many respects if I were Poilievre, though. And I think things have lined up in a better way than they were going into the last campaign. Like we're back more on the affordability issues as a whole in terms of their dominance. I think there's some buyer's remorse with not a ton of Liberal voters who went to Carney last time, but enough of them to tighten it even more. And I generally agree with what you just put forward, David, that I think it's going to be an even more polarized vote than it was last time, squeezing the NDP even harder and perhaps the Bloc even harder. But you add all that together, and I'm not sure that 2 years from now you get a better shot at it than you have today with if you're Poilievre. Like I think it's considerably better than it was going into the last campaign. And it was close enough that you're going to be tempted to take a shot at it.
Isn't it for sure going to be better than 2 years from now? Like 18 months from now, 12 months from now?
I don't know that that's
growth
the
is
case.
The longer this government lives, isn't it going to wear more of the economic challenges? Do it now.
But then Carney's shine might look a little different too.
But it's going to be Trump.
Well, let me finish a thought on that. Like I think the Trump stuff, I assume, will be some version of what we're going through now. I as long as he's in the White House, I think there's going to be all kinds of erratic shit coming from south of the border. that's going to be disrupting stuff. So I kind of view it'll be some version of same.
And that remains carnization the whole, right, Kory?
Right. I think so, but here's where things could be better for Carney, or they could be worse for Carney, and I guess we'll see. And this is the major projects and the other stuff. He's sold two things: one, ability to deal with Trump better than Poilievre. And I think he's still winning that fight insofar as there's a fight there to be had. However, that fight isn't as big in the minds of the voters as it was in the last campaign. The second part of what he sold was this reorientation of our economy, of getting people working and doing new things and doing bigger things than we ever thought possible in times that we could never imagine, or whatever the fucking line was. That is the other part of this. It's TBD, I guess, as to how that's going to go, right? Like I think this is your duck analogy, David, that at the surface of the water it doesn't look like there's a lot happening. I think the legs are churning furiously below the waterline. But whether or not that actually results in stuff happening it remains to be seen. If you had a pipeline deal, if you had a bunch of other things going on where it looked like, okay, well, this guy actually has some chops on managing the economy and he seems to have a plan and all of that, then I think that's advantage Carney. If it's bogged down in courts and the normal bullshit that we see on these major projects, then I think it's advantage Poilievre, because then you've basically lost your strongest narrative storyline, and you haven't delivered on the other half terribly effectively either. On trying to implement what is essentially a conservative plan, right? Like the proposals around the reorientation of the economy and paring down regulation and speeding things up, like that's all basically conservative stuff.
Well, wait though, Kory, that this budget is going to be a massive piece of industrial strategy that the Conservatives would never have done.
Yeah,
right?
Well, we'll see. Like, I guess we'll see, right? Because like, there's.
I mean, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, because maybe just getting rid of all the regs is the right thing to do. But they're going to go a different way.
I think there's a combination of the two. Like, they're talking about one process for environmental assessments or an impact analysis. Those are conservative notions. But, yes, is there industrial policy in there too? Yeah, absolutely there is. That's more in keeping with where I think a lot of the provincial governments are anyway. Like, that's certainly Ford, but I would argue that's Houston and others as well. So, let's see what this thing looks like. But, there's an interesting choice for Poilievre. Do you pull the pin on this now? You're probably in a better position than you were going into the last election. And it preempts whatever's going to happen on the other side. Like, it hasn't happened yet, which is a pretty compelling storyline for you if you're Poilievre. If it does happen, things could get worse for Poilievre, if he actually starts delivering results on that. But if he doesn't, maybe it's better for Poilievre to wait. So I think, like, I could play it either way if I were the Conservatives. But, in either scenario, I think they're in a stronger position overall.
I'm not sure that time is Carney's friend on this stuff. I think right now Canadians are giving him the benefit of the doubt that we're still in a place where people are living basically off their trust of their perception of his competence, and the demand for results has been low. That will not be the case 2 years from now. And when we talk about the major project stuff, look, I mean, those questions of Indigenous consultation, for example, you can either do that through the front end of the process or you can do through the courts on the back end. There's going to be lengthy delays in some of these things. It's inevitable. You can approve these things as quickly as you want, but you still have to do the same stuff. And so I think it's not clear that that will necessarily be an obvious win for people. I would say I see two things for the Conservatives. The first is, to their favor of potentially going early, is the fact that all of the questions that we've talked about, for example, around the framing of the budget and what is the core problem that this budget is responding to, none of those are the number one concern of voters, which is affordability and the cost of living. That remains the number one concern of voters. And this government has shown themselves very incapable of keeping that front and center in what they're doing as they get pulled deeper into the back and forth with Trump. And as they're laying out this major project strategy, this has fallen off the table for them. So they are not able to crystallize that into that type of generational shift messaging. You saw an attempt, sort of, with that in the speech that he gave, but that's as close as they've come to it, and I do not think it hits the mark there. So that's one advantage, is that you still have Poilievre out there talking about the affordability issues that really matter to most Canadians in a more immediate sense. But here's the problem. He's still a dick, right, guys? Like, he's still super unlikable. He has actually doubled down on a lot of the things that made him unlikable leading up to the last campaign. And so that problem is still there for him as a ceiling. And in fact, as time has gone on, he's leaned into that even more. So though that dynamic, I think, remains very static for them. And certainly what I'm hearing is that most people on the Conservative benches are pretty desperate to avoid an election right now. There are some theoretical potential gains for them, but I think in the real world, they recognize that there are limits. There are real limits to what they can do with him as leader, and they need to get him through this leadership vote and turn a page and then go forward some other direction, because what he's putting in the window right now is just a doubling down on what was actually, in the end, a failed strategy for them.
Well, I don't mean to tell tales out of school, but Kory and I were chatting earlier this week in a different format, and he was acknowledging the dubiousness of going into an election down 23, 24 points on leadership rating.
I mean,
that is the issue, right? Like, that's the only thing that I think would hold you back on it.
But like it's a pretty big thing.
But it's a relative comparison, though, guys. Like, it is a relative comparison. It's not that Poilievre is hated. He's not. He's certainly not loved. But like I've seen worse leadership numbers than what he has. It's that Carney is comparatively so much stronger than he is. He's still, got some new paint on him, right? Like, it's, I think that is, but he's getting beaten up. He's getting, knocked around a bit out there. And there's some dents in what used to be, that shiny new facade. So I think that changes over time, but, and I would also say that Poilievre is trying to do some of the right things. I would say
not very hard, Kory.
Well, I would say with mixed results, right? Or you see the old stuff slip through sometimes, but he is actually doing mainstream media interviews and things, which I think was one of the big misses last time, is not talking to boomer voters, not communicating in those channels. So I do see there are signs of change. So I don't think it's fair to say everything is the same and he hasn't learned anything from that. I don't view that as an accurate reflection of what's going on. Now, is it enough? There's an argument to have around that.
I think it's worse.
Well, it's so much worse
for him on the leadership.
He's trying and he's not succeeding. Maybe then.
Well, it could be, but I just come back to, it's relative, and things are not all,
that's my point,
all super shiny and great for Mark Carney right now.
Last week, I told you about some of the ways our sponsor Interact is evolving to meet the needs of younger, digitally native Canadians who expect personalization and speed at every turn. Well, this week, not only are we anticipating a federal budget, but Interact is walking the walk with a pretty major announcement. Tomorrow, they're launching Connect, a new Canadian-made way to pay online. It brings together payment options from participating financial institutions, offering Canadians an expanded range of payment options and online checkout, including checking and savings accounts, credit and debit cards, or lines of credit through their financial institution. So how does it work? The first time you sign up, you connect through your participating financial institution's secure login. After that, you can pay for things at participating merchants in as little as one click. And just like Interact Debit and Interact e-Transfer, Connect is built right here in Canada, giving consumers and businesses more choice in how they pay, while keeping competition and innovation rooted at home. That matters, because convenience shouldn't come at the cost of sovereignty. Connect keeps payments on trusted Canadian infrastructure, contributing to a more accessible and innovative digital economy for everyone.
So can I just, because I also want to take this to one slightly different spot after. Just to finish up on Poilievre, from my perspective, there are two reasons that he doesn't want an election right now. The first is what's bad now for Carney will likely get worse. And that isn't just the economic outlook. It is also his position, which is so critical to this leadership dynamic, that he's the right choice to take on Trump. More time, more lack of evidence that Trump can be bested in any way, that Trump can be triumphed over in more way, takes away that relative victory for him against Poilievre. And to me, the big leadership deficit number, part of it, I do think, is that there are portions of the population who go, I don't like that guy, I don't trust that guy. And I think that Poilievre, as a conservative leader, is NDP toxin, right? Like he just absolutely drives NDP voters to the Liberals because they're so frightened of him. But I think the biggest dimension of it is that people don't think on the critical issue of the day that he can be trusted to manage Trump, to deal with Trump, that his judgment, that his instincts, that his values are in the right place. And that relative judgment is really, really critical. More time might help improve that. The second thing is he's got to fix something about himself. He's got to alter the way in which he connects with Canadians. And yeah, he's doing a little bit of mainstream media, but only you and I know that. Like there's been a couple of mainstream media interviews. He needs some time to repair and reposition himself to make himself a little bit more acceptable. Whether he'll want to take advantage of that, maybe not.
Yeah, but like there's no evidence that he wants to, right? Like,
that's right. But here's the other question, though. If the government doesn't fall, let's say the government doesn't fall, which I think is the most overwhelmingly 95% likely outcome. The government doesn't fall, then Carney has a problem. When do I get my fucking election? Because he needs that election. I am convinced an election 18 months from now, 24 months from now, some of the dynamics that I'm arguing are in place so vociferously might weaken. And
he needs some shit by then, though. He needs some action on some of these fronts. He needs some shovels in the ground. He needs some projects moving ahead. He needs some new trade agreements with trade deals with other countries. And he probably maybe needs a different situation with the United States, probably.
He needs something, but to me, some of those things could take 3-4 years to manifest. Yeah. So, I think as soon as this budget passes, I think you've got to be the political operation surrounding Carney, the partisan campaign, electoral operation needs to be thinking, do we want to provoke a spring election or do we want to provoke one in the fall? The fall is interesting. A Canadian election that's acting in concert with the midterms in the United States. Maybe that means we're flooded with talk about Trump all the time, and that helps to force the frame. But by that time, economic numbers could be weaker. Maybe you don't have any kind of deal or progress, and so you're going to the table with empty cards. So, it's interesting. But I think as soon as this budget passes, there's immense pressure on Carney to find an opportunity to pull the plug on your own government. And I think that's got to be within 12 months at the most.
All right. So listen, here, let's manage this show a little bit. So we've gone on for most of the show now talking about this, which is great, but it really means we don't have time to do full justice to our other topic. So I'm not going to read anything from it. Justin Ling had a really interesting column in the Toronto Star. You should read it about the Canada-US dynamic. What I want to do is use our remaining time here to focus this group in. And Jordan, maybe I'll start with you on how Trump is affecting all of our internal dynamics. Like we can't even have an open conversation amongst ourselves about what we need to do for fear of him hearing it and reacting to it in some way. The article was going to be about the reaction to the ad. And we talked about that a little bit last week, and there was more stuff on that this week. But even just in this, we were talking about whether or not you can fully position the budget the way you'd like to position it without enraging Trump or somehow getting Trump, giving Trump the belief that he's really hurting us and maybe he should do more of it. Whatever. Like, this is a very weird circumstance to be operating in. And how do you think the best way for Canada to be proceeding, and the Canadian government in particular to be proceeding, in this circumstance where you got this volatile guy who seems to be listening to every little thing you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, he continues to be a chaos machine, right? And I think that the destabilization is the biggest factor, and it's not linear or logical. And I think that that's an important thing that maybe I would quibble a little bit with the setup, David. I don't think he is listening to everything. I think there are certain things that come to his attention through a variety of means, but by no means do I think he's listening to the entirety of the Canadian conversation. That we don't actually have evidence of that. But I think that what you see is just the degree to which the Carney government is at the mercy of these waves of Trump's interest and involvement in a timing that they don't control, on grounds that they don't control, and it puts them domestically in a really challenging position. And I think you saw that this week for sure. So the debate in Canada has been a little bit, well, was the ad right or wrong? And, but really like the question of whether Trump broke off talks because of the ad, like I think, objectively, it's pretty patently absurd. Like the idea that that was the real true reason for that, absent any other causes, sort of similar to the idea that Canadian fentanyl is flooding the United States.
Can I stop you for a second on this? I agree. So I thought that last week when we were talking about this.
Yeah.
And the only thing that's given me pause, Jordan, is Carney's apology to Trump. Because let's just assume for the purposes of this conversation, because I think these are reasonable assumptions, that Carney doesn't want to apologize to Trump. That Carney sees Trump presumably much the same way we all see Trump. That Carney doesn't want to look like the apology's going to be terribly unpopular with Canadians. It's not something that they're going to want to see happen. Let's say that for a whole bunch of reasons, it wasn't a positive initiative on his part to go apologize for the ad. Therefore, he must have apologized because Trump let him know one way or another that there were going to be fucking severe consequences.
Sure. I think that that's all true. I completely agree that he doesn't want to apologize. It's frankly like it's a bit humiliating to see that. I think a lot of Canadians had a really negative response to the backlash from the president on the ad, and like the real ick factor to see Carney apologizing and not even really to get anything, just to maybe get a foot back in the door to talk some more.
Just not to get another beating.
Yeah, and so my point more broadly is that I think that what we're seeing unfold with respect to what's actually driving a lot of Trump's involvement and engagement with Canada and criticism is a lot of factors in the United States, right? It's domestic political pressure that he's facing. It's the court case on the tariffs coming before the Supreme Court. So there's a lot that's kind of that's driving his concern around that. That's another factor in this. But I think the problem for Carney and for the Canadian government in terms of what they also have to keep an eye on. So yes, it's about what do you need to do to continue to engage with the US government. But I think we should also point out that it does appear that like talks are still at some level ongoing, right? So people are still discussing. It's not a complete freeze out. It's just that Trump and Carney are taking a bit of a break right now. And is that necessarily a bad thing? I'm not convinced that it is. And I mean, I think Justin Ling makes this case in the piece as well, which is that if, as is reported, the deal that was on the table for steel and aluminum was, number one, not actually that close, and number two, not actually that good, I think that actually Trump probably did Carney a pretty big favor here. Because if Carney had come forward doing, like, providing major concessions for an industry like auto in exchange for a weak agreement on steel and aluminum, that would not play well here at home. And the challenge is that as time goes forward and Carney is constantly sort of on his back heels in this relationship with Trump, it undermines certainly the sense that Canadians have somebody fighting for them at the national level, even if we can sort of debate whether that is a thing he needs to do as a responsible leader to get back in the door. It doesn't look good. And also, there is this unresponded to appetite within the Canadian public for stronger measures. So to go circle back to your question about is Trump listening to us? Well, it would be good if he was. And if he is listening, then there is an opportunity for the Canadian government to bring together, as we've talked about before, the premiers, major business stakeholders, labor leaders, and let's talk about what else we have in our arsenal on the table in this relationship with the United States to get off this back foot, to get off this purely responsive place where we're entirely at the mercy of what Trump sees on Fox on any given day. So conversations about leverage that remains to us, not even necessarily having to enact it, but even just talking about that in a coordinated national sense would represent a shift in our attitude in those negotiations. And so my point is that those are things that have not been revisited since the very earliest days of this trade war. And perhaps it's time for the Prime Minister to give those a shot.
All right, Scott?
I think two things could be true. I think that Justin's conclusion, I think Coyne had a column similar in terms of its bottom line, which was that this outcome, talks are stalled. We're in a situation where there appears to be kind of détente, and therefore there's no deal. May turn out to be in our best interest, and therefore Carney's best interest, but certainly maybe in the country's best interest, because any deal you could get right now is probably worse, and we may find that with time, the logic of Trump's tariff agenda starts to unravel. Like, I think one of the big pieces of the news last week is Trump got rolled, really badly rolled on China and by China. And, you know, that was him just backing
1
down.
year of soybeans, man, what a win.
Well, it just him completely backing down. China just said, listen, we've got rare earth minerals in our fist and you can go pound sand. And he just capitulated. And, you know, we're going to see whether some of the consequences start to roost and create political problems and so on and so forth. But the second thing that's true, so I think that I can agree that the outcome is okay, is maybe we can rationalize it. But that doesn't mean that the ad didn't provoke Trump. And the body of the evidence to me is that the ad absolutely, when Besson's on TV on the Sunday morning programs in the United States bringing it up, it struck their chord. I don't think they're using it as a beer or as an excuse. So this is just a delicate dance, and Canadians are contradictory, and Ford doesn't have to deal with this, and EB doesn't have to deal with this, right? Only Carney has to ultimately deal with it. The contradictory nature of Canadians is that we want our leaders to protect our jobs and growth and industry, but we also want our leaders to tell Trump to go fuck himself.
So
and
isn't the truth that Canadians like both Ford and Carney?
That's right. And so when those things are in conflict, it becomes very challenging. And so, you know, it is what it is. I think the interesting question now is, will EB proceed with those ads? And at some point after, you know, 10 years, 15 years of hearing premiers, I guess it goes back further than that from when we were in government. And I've worked for premiers and I've worked for prime ministers. So I've been on both sides of this fence. But when we hear provinces say, hey, stay out of our kitchen, man, you know, the delivery of these programs, this is a provincial jurisdiction, you're always incurring in provincial jurisdiction, yada, 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 yada. Well, ultimately, the prosecution of the relationship with the United States, fundamental foreign relationship, is federal. And so it doesn't mean you don't play on it, doesn't mean you don't get invited to play on it. But what happens when the Prime Minister says, I do not want you to fucking do that, EB? I don't want you to do that. We saw what happened with Ford. Don't do it.
British Columbians may be unhappy about the fact that they hear aluminum mentioned 30 times as often as they hear forestry mentioned.
No question. And so EB may come to the conclusion that he has no choice but for his domestic political considerations. But the broader, it creates a challenge for Carney, because there is this question of, well, for the love of God, who's driving this car?
The following message is brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Not all nicotine products carry the same risk. Smoke-free alternatives like heated tobacco, vaping products, and nicotine pouches don't burn tobacco or produce smoke. While not risk-free, evidence shows they have the potential to be significantly less harmful than cigarettes. Yet, Canadian regulations restrict access and limit communication about these alternatives, keeping adult smokers in the dark. Sweden has accepted this science, embraced smoking harm reduction, and driven smoking rates below 6%. Canada has the tools to do the same, but it requires political will. It's time to align regulation with science, expand access to smoke-free products, and empower Canadians to make informed choices. The evidence is clear. The opportunity is real. Canada can be smoke-free. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
Guys, remember back in March when the government wasn't allergic to first ministers' meetings? Maybe time.
Well, but I think there's it's not a different challenge to what you're talking about on the comms. Like, it's not good news. And Trump is watching and listening to all of this stuff, and these, carefully crafted strategies of we're going to do this and say this to him in the Oval Office, yet we're going to do and say something else publicly. Like, those are all pretty challenging, and I think it's challenging for the first ministers as well. But look, it's not like premiers are at war with Carney. I think, like, everyone is trying to find a way to make this work and trying to work together to do it. And there's lots of communication going on, but not everything works out the way people wanted it to. And then if it's just going to become a bunch of finger pointing, then I don't think that's helpful. But, that said, it's hard to sit there and say that this is, something that came out of the blue and something that, surprised everyone. Like, look, it's, there was lots of discussion about this before that ever aired.
Nobody can anticipate really what the fuck we're dealing with here. It's so
I think
abnormal.
That's exactly the point, David.
It's
I
so
think that's
abnormal.
exactly the point.
And it's just, fuck. All right. It's 10:50. Let's get to Scott, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say one thing, setting aside this whole debate. I still think, because you raised this earlier, David, and it's a fair point, and you called me on it. I still think that selling this budget, as Trump made me do it, is the only proper play. I think that you are really playing with matches to say, we're going to have a deficit of whatever this gobsmacking number is going to be, for which there's been virtually zero preconditioning, and risking, without very many leaked measures, that people would just accept the concept of it without it being driven home to them, using the instrument that causes them to nod their head, which is Trump. We have to deal with Trump. I just think you got to figure, maybe you have to nuance it a bit more than you'd like, but Trump made me do it is the truth behind this budget, and it should be sold that way if you want it to be politically accepted.
The only thing I'll say back, Scott, is that I'm really certain that Carney knows much better than I do how much damage Trump can do to us. And he is choosing, despite what would be any normal political personal impulse and what would be good politics, to completely suck up to this guy, to completely not offend this guy in any way, to not say anything there, here, or anywhere that he could take negatively about himself. That's how sensitive he feels this situation is.
Yes.
Like, I just don't assume, Jordan, that he's doing this because he wants to.
I'm sure he's not.
I assume all that too.
Yeah. But I think he has to keep an eye on the public mood here as well.
I know. It may be that they can't be managed.
Dave, do it in a way that Trump may find pleasing and flattering even, right?
I don't think the world is totally decided what the right way to respond to Trump is, because, to Scott's earlier point, Trump got rolled by China pretty bad. And really, I'd say there's only 3 countries in the world that have pushed back against Trump on any of this. One is China, the other is India, and the third is Canada. And I'm not sure that total ass-kissing mode is good strategy or good politics. And
we don't have the leverage those countries have, Kory. Those countries can fight him with actual leverage.
We don't have zero leverage either, and some of our leverage is actually being able to go into the U.S. market and make a compelling case. That is something that China doesn't have the ability to do that we do. And, you got to fight with the tools that you have. China fights with critical minerals because it has a lock on critical minerals. But the notion that we are just totally powerless and defenseless, and that we just have to accept our fate and kiss his ass while accepting it, I don't think that's A, true, or B, viable. And here's what it for sure isn't: what Carney got elected to do. And there are others out there who will say, different things in terms of what the correct approach is. I don't think it is so fucking obvious that this is the right plan and the only way of skinning this cat. And I think there's lots of intelligent people out there who would say that there are different approaches here that are worth taking a look at. It's not so prima facie, accept our fate and thank him for it.
And this has not been tried remotely since early spring in Canada.
Our leverage is not, let's be honest, if you want to have that conversation, let's do it in really genuine terms. Our leverage is not the ability to run an ad in Texas that's going to persuade MAGA that Trump is wrong and Canada is right. That ain't going to happen. Our leverage is oil. Our leverage is electricity. Our leverage is critical minerals and the prospect that
those are all leverage too.
That's what it is. But then every time I hear a conservative say, show some balls, I also hear them say, but don't touch our oil exports. Well, I mean, like, I don't know if you can have that cake and eat it too.
You know, we're just not in the same situation China is. Listen, if we denied them something that they really wanted, they'll come and fucking take it.
That is the yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, but like there's more than just total denial. There is export tariffs. There are other things that are less than we're going to turn off the power. Like, I think if you're saying we're going to turn off the power, we're going to turn off the oil, I think your assessment is correct, David. I don't think we're going to face a U.S. invasion over a countervailing tariff strategy. I don't think that's true. I think that's a ridiculous proposition. So, like, it's not like there's one thing or another. Like, there are nuances between total fucking war and kiss the guy's ass while he harms you.
And the challenging thing is that the current approach is not working out really well either.
So are you, like, you wait a second, Jordan, I want to nail you to the goddamn wall on this because you have been a little bit jellyish in the last 30 minutes. I've been hearing you chip in, but not explicitly state your position. Are you saying we should go elbows up at this guy?
Yes, I'm far closer to Kory. I'm far closer to where Kory's at. I think that we do have evidence to suggest that pushing back on him does yield better results. That was absolutely the case of what happened in the early spring. I do think that Canada has things that the U.S. needs. I do think that there's granularity in terms of how you put those in play. I think the first point of contact on that is having some sort of a national conversation that implies that they might be on the table. I also think that the federal government here has allowed a notion to creep in that there are major divisions between the prime minister and the premiers, and that that's something they need to alleviate publicly, regardless of how many conversations are happening in the back room. It's not obvious to Canadians that those conversations are happening. So we're having fucking dumb conversations about whether there's a big wedge between Ford and Carney rather than talking about what we might actually have at our disposal to push the United States. I think as time goes forward in the United States, as we get closer to the midterms, Trump is going to experience more domestic political pressure, but it's not going to fix it on its own. So we have to apply some of our own pressure and see if we can change the tables a little bit more favorably. But my main criticism is that the approach that we're taking right now, number one, doesn't acknowledge a real desire on the part of the Canadian public to stand up for the country. And that leaves, I think, the government politically pretty vulnerable, particularly because it is absolutely the opposite of how this prime minister campaigned. And secondly, that there's actually not a whole lot of evidence that the current approach is working real well. We have more tariffs than we did 6 months ago, far more tariffs. And the ones that we have on those critical industries are hurting to a point of incredible pain and tens of thousands of layoffs and jobs being irreparably lost to the United States. So the situation is very difficult. There is, of course, a risk that turning up the temperature on the United States backfires, but the status quo is not neutral. It's not harmless to leave it as it is. So.
Well, the notion that we're going to get through this scot-free is just so false, right? Like, it's going to be a smaller economy and pain forever, or it's going to be, perhaps more pain in a fight up front. Like, what the right way to do this is, there isn't consensus on it.
Bank of Canada actually had graphs that illustrate what you and Jordan are talking about, which is Bank of Canada says, here's what the trajectory of the Canadian economy was pre-Trump, and here's what the trajectory of the Canadian economy is post-Trump, and it is permanently structurally lower.
Yeah. So, but we're not having that conversation. Maybe this feeds into a little bit of, what you were saying, Scott, in terms of, how you frame the budget, et cetera. But like, we are going to be a poorer country as a result of this. Mm-hmm. And whether it's saying that, I agree, withholding things from the U.S. economy probably ends poorly for us, but finding other markets for them and saying, well, we found another market to go and sell that stuff to, and have that be a realistic thing is, I think, a viable plan. And, as to
Well,
whether
that's
or
a
not
10-year fix.
That's what
a
he's,
2-week
isn't
problem.
that what Carney's doing? But he's trying to rub Trump's belly while he's doing it so that you don't notice.
Show one trade deal that we've gotten, that demonstrates that, right? Like it's too little, too slowly, I think, for the political fight.
I think a state visit to China is pretty big development.
I do too.
Well, but like a visit is not a trade deal. Okay, let's see what we actually get.
It's easy to say, just snap your fingers. Like my takeaway is it's an awfully shitty time to be prime minister. I think about 1995,
well,
David.
step
if you want to
aside
compare
and
the
let
two
somebody
budgets.
else wants to.
Well, no, but I'm just saying, I think about 1995 and our big battle against the deficit. Well, the deficit didn't have a fucking temper tantrum and turn around and try to literally beat you into orange juice. And
it's not the same situation. It's a much more difficult situation. We have to go because this is supposed to be an hour-long pod, and it is much longer than that now. Right. Kory, you look like you have something more to say, and I'm going to let you say it, and then we'll go.
Well, I'll just close on this. The notion that provinces should step aside while we go through this and allow the federal government to do whatever the fuck it wants is the most unrealistic comment that I think you could ever make. Because anything that you're going to do that's going to put any amount of pressure on this guy, or where the punishment of the decisions you make are going to be felt the hardest, is going to be largely in provinces and in parts of the economy that they are supposed to be looking after. So whether it's the province of BC on forestry, provincial responsibility, hammers that economy, like they're going to have a voice about what happens there. And that's not going to change. So everybody's got to work together a little bit here. But, it's the notion that everyone should stand aside and allow the, impeccable, immaculate management of this trade relationship by the prime minister to do it solely on its own is, I don't think, realistic.
That's a bit of a straw man in comparison to what I said. The question is, in a circumstance informed by what's just happened with the Ontario ad, who has the authority to make the final decision? Carney says, I'm asking you, I'm telling you, don't run that ad, EB. What happens?
Well, you can ask, you can't tell.
Yeah.
Well,
maybe he could win in court, but that's a cumbersome process.
Yeah. I mean, you got to solve the problem another way. You got to.
I know, I hear you, but now the problem is on everybody's radar.
Even more importantly, Scott, what does the expression scot-free mean?
I don't know. I think
a lot of different things.
Oh, hang on. Let's see. Here we go. Ah, there you have it. Aren't things better almost immediately?
And yet we still hear you, Scott.
All right, go. I'll haunt you like a ghost.
Kory, fire up a hey you, would you?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The hey yous are about to begin.
Well, I'm gonna aim people towards the hurly burly. I do hey to you to my buddy Steve Outhouse. It's a little bit delayed, but very worthy just the same. He ran the provincial campaign for the Newfoundland and Labrador PC party in the most recent election, and Steve's been quietly stacking up a bunch of wins out there, and I really encourage people to listen to your interview with him. I thought it was really good.
Oh, great, thanks. Jordan?
Hey, you going out this week to the Alberta labor movement, the broader Canadian labor movement, and the Alberta NDP. And I am most uncharacteristically going to build on Scott's hey you from next week because, well, he was dramatic. The actual legislation was so much worse even than it could have been that came from Danielle Smith to use the notwithstanding clause to violate the rights of Alberta teachers as they were out on strike. It is essential. It is absolutely critical that there be a massive political price for this. And this is something that the labor world and the Alberta NDP have to work together to make sure is the case. Because if other premiers see that it is possible to fuck around with the labor movement and with labor rights in this way without finding out anything, that is catastrophic. So this is going to be a long game. This is not something that is going to happen overnight, but this is where the resources and the organization and the advertising capabilities and all of that has to be brought to bear on this government to make it very clear that when a government absolutely grossly oversteps to violate their own citizens' rights in this way, it ain't for free.
All right. And Scott?
I'll build on that and my hey you of last week, going back to the notwithstanding clause on Friday. As a matter of course, barely even got reported. Hardly could break through in the news cycle. Pierre Poilievre says that he wouldn't hesitate to use the notwithstanding clause. He didn't like this the court ruling with respect to child porn. And I'll just say it again. It is absolutely dead easy to say you're going to deny the rights of pedophiles because they have no sympathy. But that set of rights that's being denied in your recourse to the courts is now just casually overcome. And it'll be one minority this week and another minority next week. And some will be sympathetic and some will be unsympathetic. But my answer to Jordan is I don't think there's going to be a political uproar. I don't think that Danielle Smith's going to pay a political price. And I don't think we're looking at whether or not use of the notwithstanding clause will be normalized. I think it has been normalized.
You know that, by the way, fuck anybody with any legal training, it just drives you crazy. The court did not say that you cannot have mandatory minimums against genuine pedophiles. It just said the legislation's too broad. This is shitty drafting. You just need a better piece of legislation that is charter compliant. Anyway,
you only say that because you're soft on pedophiles, David, and that's the level of intellectual.
I am the reason they're not releasing the Epstein files.
Yeah, exactly.
How many trips to the island, David?
Epstein.
How many trips to the island?
Once you're on a private plane, Corey, you never go back.
No.
You don't ask where it's going. You don't ask where it's
I look
going.
around though, and I'm sitting next to Epstein. Prince Andrew's over here, and Diddy is doing the music.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The human formerly known as Prince.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
My hey you goes out to Prime Minister Carney. You need a First Ministers meeting. You started off really strongly with the First Ministers, and there was a genuine Team Canada, and they loved your approach, and they loved how you were talking about the economy to them and everything like that. And now, I don't know, maybe we went up and talking enough, but I hear EB's a little bit off, and Canoe is more with Ford's approach and EB's approach, and it's just cracking up a little bit. The fact that you and Doug Ford are on separate pages is a real problem, because that Ontario Federal Alliance is really critical to getting us through this. And so fix all those relationships, and it probably starts with a First Ministers meeting where you update people on what the real fucking goods are about what's going on. So I would do that. Thank you to the three of you for being with me here today. A great conversation. I want to thank all of you accursed who watched or listened, and the various and numerous sponsors who make this show possible every week. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you next week. More of the Curse of Politics.